I just didn't have the luxury of sleeping or taking care of myself. So I collapsed. I hit my head on my desk, broke my cheekbone. I've discovered the hard way by collapsing from exhaustion that when I'm sleep deprived, not only am I burned out, but also I'm the worst version of myself. Our culture is focused on productivity, and productivity is very important. But for me, it's not enough anymore to just be productive. I also want to enjoy what I'm doing. I started a company that basically had to crack the code on behavior change. That was the number one task.
Hi, everyone. I'd love to introduce you to Arianna Huffington. She's the founder and CEO of Thrive Global. She was also the founder of Huffington Post, and she's also authored 15 books. But today, I also want to give you a different side of Arianna in my very first podcast that I'm calling Radically Candid with Arianna Huffington. Arianna, there are two things I absolutely hate about introductions, which is number one, it's always professional. And number two, it's always great and lively and positive. So for starters, can you tell us what you're like outside of work? Like, how would you introduce yourself outside of work?
Well, I find actually that my work and my life are so interconnected. I feel incredibly blessed that I'm doing something I love, that I hope has an impact on people's lives, and that also my family, my two daughters, my younger sister that I'm very close to, and my friends are all very engaged and involved in. So, when people talk about work-life balance, I see it more as work-life integration. How do you integrate the two? And for me, I find that as long as I've gotten a good night's sleep, I am able to bring joy into what I'm doing. I've discovered the hard way by collapsing from exhaustion that when I'm sleep deprived, not only am I burned out, but also I'm the worst version of myself. I'm more reactive, I'm less empathetic, I'm less joyful, and that affects everything I'm doing and all my relationships.
How do you define a good night's sleep? It's so subjective, right? Because there are people who sleep 4 hours, 5 hours, and they feel they've had enough. But what's your definition of a good night's sleep?
Well, that all depends on your genetics in terms of if you are able to have a great night's sleep in 4 to 5 hours, it means you have a genetic mutation and you don't need what 99.5% of the population need, which is 7 to 9 hours. But there are people who don't need 7 to 9 hours. And if you are not sure if you are one of them, you can have a genetic test. But I know I'm not one of them because if I have 4 to 5 hours, I'm just not the best version of myself. What about you?
I think for me, it's 8 to 9 hours. But what I've seen is I think 99% of us think that we're mutants because we feel that it's okay to have 4 to 5 hours. Especially when we're under this misconception that sometimes hustle culture or just success equates to burning out. But I also want to check in on the other side, right? Which is something I just mentioned. We all have great introductions. I just made a great introduction of Arianna Huffington. But what is the other side, right? What was a moment over the last, say, 5-10 years where you were at your absolute lowest, where maybe you were struggling with your own well-being? You were burnt out, maybe. Is there any moment which changed your life forever?
Absolutely. And that moment was in 2007, 2 years into building the Huffington Post. I was the mother of 2 teenage daughters. And I had bought into the collective delusion that you just mentioned, that in order to succeed, to be super founder and super mom, I just didn't have the luxury of sleeping or taking care of myself. So I collapsed. I hit my head on my desk, broke my cheekbone. And that was the beginning of my recognizing that burnout was both my personal diagnosis, but also an epidemic around the world because we had bought into this delusion that burnout is the price we pay for success.
Wow. I can't imagine myself in that situation, but like I'm sure something significantly changed in you, like a switch. So what changed from your perspective? Like I understand, like, you realized that you were burnt out, but did your definition of success, of the meaning of life, something significantly change?
Absolutely. I've always had a deep kind of spiritual part of my life. One of the reasons I love India so much is because when I was 17 years old, I went to India and studied comparative religion at the university that Rabindranath Tagore had founded in Shantiniketan near Calcutta. I just felt completely at home. It was the best experience, and I brought it with me. And I go to India every year. I love the people. I love the way spirituality is sort of embedded in the DNA of the people, even if they've never read the Vedas or the Gita. There is something about that other dimension that imbues everything. And I've brought that in my life, But despite that, despite the fact that I've been a meditator since I was 13 years old, loved always reading spiritual books, I got caught up in the culture that we are all swimming in, which assumes that when we power through exhaustion, we are going to be more successful. We are going to prove that we really love our work and love what we are doing. And that's what success is. That way we define success really as just these two metrics, money and status / power. And that's why I wrote a whole book in 2014 called Thrive, which is about that third metric of success, which is about our well-being, wisdom, wonder, giving.
Can you describe the third metric of success a little more?
So, the third metric of success, which is basically what philosophers have called what is a good life. The third metric of success does not mean that the first two metrics are not important. So succeeding in material terms is totally fine, but it's not enough. It's like sitting on a two-legged stool. Sooner or later, you're going to fall off if you haven't cultivated that third metric. And let's start with well-being. Well-being, it's our health. And, you've worked in health for a lot of your life, so you know how critical it is. So health and well-being, and making sure that when we prioritize our sleep, what we are eating, how much we are moving, we are going to be better at everything we're doing in the world. And we're going to bring more joy into what we are doing. And joy is very important. I talk a lot about joy because our culture is focused on productivity, and productivity is very important as well. But for me, it's not enough anymore to just be productive. I also want to enjoy what I'm doing. I feel it's like a blessing to be alive and to be talking here with you, to be able to bring that sense into everything I'm doing every day. So the next thing is wisdom. We are obsessed with data right now, and data is, of course, incredibly important. But we're swimming in data and starved for wisdom. And I think it's so important to reconnect with a deeper part of ourselves where we can find our wisdom. The third thing is a sense of wonder at life. We're surrounded by the wonder and mystery of life, but most of the time we are completely disconnected from it. We are just looking down at our phones and or losing ourselves in the rabbit hole of social media and missing that wonder that surrounds us and that is also inside us.
I love that last bit because I remember there was a time you used to use 4 Blackberries, right? And
Yes.
you used to call like your cell phone as a kryptonite. So how did things change from having 4 Blackberries to what you're saying today?
Well, as I said, there was that big turning point of my collapse. in 2007, and then bringing together all the different parts of my life, the spiritual part, the ambitious, productive part, the mother, the founder, bringing it all together in a way that makes more sense and makes my life much more fulfilling. And the fourth element of the third metric is giving. We all know that giving is also part of our self-care. You know, that when we give, we come from our own abundance, and that has a big impact in everything we're doing.
That's music to my ears, because if I start measuring joy as a metric in my life, I'll realize how many things I need to work on. But I just remembered a big shout out to everyone from Calcutta, including Angraj on this call, right? It's amazing to see how close you are with the Indian culture as well. But I want to jump into like the story after Huffington now, because I think most of the people know about Huffington Post, right? What is Thrive Global? Like, what is your mission with Thrive?
So I left the Huffington Post in 2016 because I wanted not just to help people raise awareness about all these issues we are discussing, but helping them take action to build these healthier habits, you know, to change behavior so that they can bring that third metric that we discussed of well-being and health and wisdom into their life. So that's why I needed to create a product company. I couldn't do it with a media company. And so I left in 2016. I started a company that basically had to crack the code on behavior change. That was the number one task. And bring rigor into the process, connect behavior change, bringing more well-being, looking at mental health, connecting all that to metrics like productivity, retention, attrition. So employers could bring Thrive into companies and see the results in business terms. Otherwise, all that remains warm and fuzzy and not a priority for companies. And so Thrive Global is a SaaS enterprise company. We work with many companies around the world, including in India. Accenture is one of our big partners, and they have more employees in India than they have in the United States. Walmart, Salesforce, Levi's, Pfizer. And we bring our app, but also we bring a whole cultural activation, because we find that in order to change behavior sustainably, it has to be a combination of micro steps, storytelling, role modeling. And it's not enough to just issue statements. You need to help people take these small incremental daily steps.
What would you say to people who believe that their low performance culture is because their employees are slacking or they need to work harder as opposed to solve for burnout? Like maybe some people need the opposite of Thrive. Like that's what they believe. What would you tell them?
Well, I think obviously you want to hire people who are hardworking, who really care about what they're doing. That's number one. But also you need to hire people who understand that working long hours doesn't mean being effective. Working hard, absolutely, I work hard, you work hard. If you love what you're doing, and these are the only people I like to work with, you work hard, you want to see results. But people confuse working hard with working long hours, with being always on, with sleeping with their phone beside them. And that makes them less productive. And especially during a time that we're all dealing with now, the crisis of the pandemic, the incredible pain and grief that people are going through, and also the anxiety about the uncertainty of what's coming. During these times, it's more important than ever to take care of yourself, because otherwise, depression and anxiety are proliferating, and we see that everywhere. And so strengthening our own resilience is key. I picked Resilience Plus as my word of 2022 because resilience is like a muscle. We have to cultivate it. And sleep, how we eat, how we move are all part of resilience.
So my question here would be twofold, right? So how do you do it for yourself? That's number one. And number two, how do you do it for your team as well? Because there are two sides to the story. And I think sometimes if you look at a post-pandemic scenario, it's both who are impacted. So how do you look at yourself and then your team?
So at myself, I have like my routine of my walking, workouts, getting enough sleep, making sure I eat things that I love, but that are not full of sugar and carbs and processed foods. And also doing the things that bring me joy, being with family and friends. With my company and the companies we work with, we bring in the 6 journeys of our app. Journey number 1 is called Recharge. And it's all about sleep and 60-second resets during the day. You know, stress is unavoidable. We all know that. But cumulative stress is avoidable. And that's the key. If we can reduce cumulative stress by having these 60-second resets during the day that move us from the sympathetic to the parasympathetic nervous system, meaning from fight or flight to greater peace. So if you go to our app, or even if you go to Zoom, we've integrated the Thrive Reset app into Zoom. And between Zoom meetings, you can download it, and it comes preloaded with over 100 60-second breathing exercises, an invitation to get up and stretch, to remember what you're grateful for, anything that reduces stress. And at the same time, and the thing that I love the most, you can create your own personalized reset. So you can put together the things you love. You know, you have your piano there. Maybe you have a pet, a friend, a child, quotes, music. And in 60 seconds, maybe while you are stressed or anxious, you are suddenly reminded of what you love about your life.
That sounds wonderful. Absolutely wonderful. I do want to check in on, if you look at it from a manager's standpoint now, usually I've seen the way, and we call managers captains at inFeedo, the way they react to burnout is, hey, take a break. Or, hey, why don't you go take a vacation? But if you can give like a prescriptive guide to any manager with a team member struggling with burnout, now that they've solved for themselves, how do they solve for a team member?
So I think I love the idea of micro steps, encouraging their team members to pick a micro step that brings improved well-being and reduced stress in their lives. And I started telling you that we start with recharge, which is around sleep and the 60-second resets, encouraging them to do these resets during the day. Then around movement. Movement can help reduce stress tremendously. It doesn't have to be an hour in the gym every day. It can simply be walking for 10 minutes, or taking, instead of everything being on Zoom, taking some meetings as calls that you can walk around. The third thing is around food. You know, often, especially when we're stressed, we binge eat, feed foods that make us, oh my God, you know, it's like the skyrocketing rates of diabetes. In India, here, how can we help people realize there is a different way to eat and enjoy the food? And you have such amazing food in India without eating so much sugar or so many processed foods that make it harder for us to basically be the best versions of ourselves.
Makes sense. But I do want to dig into the cumulative stress point that you mentioned, right? Because I think most people realize burnout when they're at the peak of burnout. And at that moment, right, do you think a vacation works? Because micro steps is a more like continuous solution. But what about someone who wants to snap out of that like void they enter when they burn out?
Great idea. So the hardest thing to do when you are burnt out is to recognize there are two important things. One is how much sleep are you getting? And the other is how addicted are you to your phone and all your social media and all your devices? Because you can go on vacation and be on your phone all the time, scrolling on social media sites or playing games or binge watching Netflix, and you'll come back just as exhausted. So not being at work doesn't mean you are recharging. That's something incredibly important for people to realize. And that's why focus is one of the journeys in our app, because we have a lot of micro steps to help people disconnect from our devices and reconnect with ourselves. You know, Thich Nhat Hanh, the great Buddhist monk, said, it's never been easier to run away from ourselves. But starting small again, even if you are burnt out, let's say when you wake up in the morning, can you take 60 seconds before you go to your phone? 60 seconds is not a long time, but it makes a difference because it creates a little barrier before you move into all the things that stress you.
It sounds so simple yet so hard. But if I really think about it, there are some people who sometimes mention that is burnout a factor of too much time at work where you sort of spend too many hours, or is it a factor of not liking your work? Because there are some claims that if you love your work, you can like work your ass off like without sleep as well. So what is your understanding or like comment on loving your work versus too much time at work? Like which one is a higher contributor to burnout?
Well, everything we're talking about here is based on science. So even if you love your work incredibly, if you need 8 hours sleep and you constantly get 4, you're going to burn out. I mean, that's not my opinion. That's a scientific fact. I've written an entire book on science, the sleep revolution, and 50 pages of scientific endnotes. Trust me. There are thousands of sleep centers around the world, and that's the conclusion.
Understood. And I think what's disheartening is there are a lot of sleep tech companies in place who are trying to reactively solve the surface problem as opposed to solve the cause for burnout itself. But if we look at people, right, what do people not understand about burnout?
I think historically, ever since the first industrial revolution, we started revering machines. And after machines, software. And after all, what is the goal with machines and with software is to minimize downtime. So we started believing that minimizing downtime is also key for human beings, but it is not. Downtime for human beings is a feature. It's not a bug. So minimizing downtime should not be the goal of how we run our lives because we think it makes us more productive. It does not. And I think what I find so interesting is that we are all in love with data, but we are ignoring the data around how to be our most productive selves. Microsoft has just put out a research paper, for example. When we're stressed and anxious, we are going to be less productive. Our brain function changes. We have what is called pandemic brain, which is foggy and not sharp and not creative. And especially in times of huge change like we're going through now, when you just can't do maintenance, creativity and collaboration and empathy and things we need to be effective at work are the first that disappear.
Wow. I think we've spoken a lot about our individual selves. And if we now look at it from a company standpoint, and since you mentioned Microsoft, we all know about the great resignation, right? Where 40% of our talent will sort of quit this year. And I do agree with you that culture is like the immune system of a company. What are your tips to sort of retain talent or improve culture in 2022?
So, one of the silver linings of the pandemic is that a lot of companies now are recognizing that culture is our immune system, and that bringing practices of well-being and strengthening mental health actually makes the company more productive and makes it more likely that people will stay. But the Great Resignation is also about people rethinking their own lives and what they value, and not just assuming that staying on the roller coaster of their current career without thinking about it is the best. And that's why we've actually created a whole new product suite to help people, wherever they are, reduce their stress and anxiety. And so whether you're on Teams or Slack or Zoom, you can have these 60-second resets. If you are a call center operator, we are bringing in Thrive calls that after, let's say, a stressful call with a customer, you are invited to take 60 seconds for yourself, to remember what you're grateful for, to stretch, to breathe. And all these things make a difference at interrupting the cycle of stress.
Interesting. And we've often spoken about exit interviews, right? Where most companies are always focused on exit interviews. But I've heard you speak a lot about entry interviews. Can you tell us more about that as well?
Yes, we feel that, especially now that we're living in a hybrid work world, onboarding is more important than ever. And at the heart of onboarding at Thrive is the entry interview. So, like yesterday, we just onboarded a new head of operations at Thrive, and he reports to me. So the manager on your first day does this entry interview. And the first question is, what is important to you outside of work? And how can we support you? And suddenly that gives immediately to the new Thriver the understanding that we want you to bring your whole self to work. We're not just saying that, we mean it, and we're here to support you.
Wow, I love that. If I were to ask you the same question, what matters to Arianna outside of work and how can Thrive support her?
Oh, I love my two daughters and my sister. We are very, very close family. And so whenever they call me, everybody knows I'll take the call, unless I'm doing a podcast with you. But even in a meeting, I'll take the call. So prioritizing them just fills me with that kind of joy that we've been talking about throughout the podcast.
Fantastic. And if you were to walk me through your core values at Thrive, what would they be? What are your favorite core values at Thrive?
So one of my favorite core values is what we call compassionate directness. In any relationship, whether it's a work relationship or a personal relationship, there will be times of friction. If people express what they're feeling, their frustrations, what's not working for them, then you can resolve everything. If they don't, it's much harder. And so we encourage compassionate directness. We reward people for compassionate directness. Our chief product officer just introduced a new principle that he calls this or better. If you ask somebody who works for you to do something, give them the freedom to also do something better if they have an idea that is better than what you suggested.
Super interesting. I think that reminds me of Radical Candor, which is very similar, and we follow that religiously as well. I don't want to sort of change direction from burnout, from culture, to a little bit about like some general messages you'd like to give, and in particular to, let's say, thousands of CHROs across Southeast Asia. What would Arianna like to say to, let's say, 1,000 CHROs across Southeast Asia? They're all listening to you.
So first of all, the CHRO job is now more important than ever. CHROs often had to struggle to convince the C-suite that the employees' well-being and mental health should be priorities. But now they are preoccupations of the C-suite as well. So it would be great to see this moment as a huge opportunity, the silver lining in the crisis, to rework the way we define productivity in work and life, to reimagine what it is to be productive. And CHROs have that power right now to do that. And we believe that to do it through a whole cultural activation is what makes a difference.
Got it. Now, speaking of CHROs, I think you spent a considerable amount of time at Huffington, and you were also involved in Uber as well. Are there any learnings, mistakes from your career pre-Thrive in the HR role that the other CHROs can learn from?
Well, I think, again, what has changed is that a culture of burnout is now much more on the minds of CHROs. Like at Uber, for example, we were dealing with a culture that was suffering from burnout, but people didn't pay attention in the same way they are paying attention now. And that's why actually we've created a dashboard at Thrive that can give CHROs a bird's eye view of where their employees are. What is the risk of burnout? What is resilience? And to be able to divide it by department, by geography, so that they can take action before things get out of hand. Because when people are burned out, that's when they operate from the worst in them. That's when, they're not just less productive, they're also more sexist, less inclusive. All the things that we all carry in us become paramount.
I like how burnout's the root cause for so many of these things. But there are moments where, and I'm sure you'll be that inspiration for, say, 1,000 CHROs when they are struggling. When you have been struggling, who has been your inspiration? Who do you look up to?
I actually have a major leader who is my inspiration, who is also a Stoic philosopher, Marcus Aurelius. I have the book that he wrote called Meditations on my nightstand. I've read it many times, but I read a page, even just one page every night. He was the emperor of Rome for 19 years. And he was also dealing with a terrible plague, constant betrayals, invasions, but he was able to find the eye in the hurricane, the calm, still center from which he could deal with everything. And I admire that so much. And I use him as a role model because often I hear CEOs saying to me, "Oh, Arianna, I'm so busy, I can't do that." And I said, well, Marcus Aurelius was the emperor of Rome. He was busy too. But he found time to reconnect with himself, with a deeper part of himself, from which he could be the best version of himself.
Wow. I was not expecting that answer. A little known fact for everyone is that inFeedo and Thrive started in the exact same year, 5 years back in 2016. And Arianna's company Thrive and inFeedo will be partnering now to solve for burnout across Asia. So Arianna, what pulled you towards inFeedo?
I absolutely love what you are doing. I love the way you are approaching these issues of burnout and mental health and using the connection of a chatbot but in a very human way, to both help people and collect amazing employee experience insights that companies can use to improve their own employee experience. So I'm a big admirer of you personally and of what you are doing, and I very much look forward to a great partnership.
Thank you so much. If you were to talk about Thrive, right? And what's your next sort of goal for 2022? What do you have in mind for Thrive this year?
So this is a big year of expansion. As I mentioned at the beginning, we are working with millions of employees around the world. And I am particularly passionate about working with frontline workers. Working with people who during the pandemic didn't have the luxury we had to be able to work from home. We are working with store associates at Walmart, for example, factory workers, and the results are amazing to see people who, through these micro steps and inspiration from others, are able to reverse diabetes or improve their mental health and their relationships. And all that through simply lifestyle and behavioral changes. You know, we are not doctors. We don't give medical advice, but so much of what we're dealing with, so many of our diseases and mental health problems are driven by the way we live our daily lives. So to end on a note of optimism, life is shaped from the inside out. And if we start with small micro steps that improve our health, our well-being, our mental health, we can build sustainable new habits that change our lives.
Thanks, Arianna. What's one thing you're still yet to figure out this year?
Oh, tons of things. I mean, I'm a lifelong learner. That's what I love. I every day brings me something new I learn. And that's what is so exciting. I don't approach life as somebody who's figured it all out. The journey is the destination.
Thanks a bunch, Arianna. Thank you so much for making time today. I really hope that everyone who's watching this, if you're struggling with burnout, with mental well-being, with a toxic work culture, something that Arianna said today changes your life in some way or the other. I really want to thank you for making time today. And I wish you all the very best for your goals in 2022.
Thank you so much. And would love to make some of the things I've written and my Thrive book available as a PDF so people can download and go deeper if they want.
Fantastic. I'm going to reach out to you a lot of times this year because I think our work is like intertwined like this.
Very, very intertwined. And that was great. You have a new career ahead of you.
Thanks so much. Thank you so much.
Bye-bye.
Yes. Bye.